They pressed him to sit the throne on a morning so bright that the city glittered like a jewel dredged from the sea, and all he could think was how the throne itself was uglier up close, rust black and twisted, a thing of grudges and soot and broken promises. The Lord spoke as if they were alone with him, though the great hall's pillars carried their words to every ear. The little folk gaped from the shadows, and the red of their mouths made them look half-starved for spectacle. Swords of oaths clattered around him, heavy and gleaming. He listened because he had been taught to listen, and because the dead never did. "At last, your grace," said a lord with a green enameled brooch. The line made straight. He could not say which line that was. They meant blood, and he felt it run in him more as weather than lineage. Winds from a burning east and snows bitter as quinces, a storm that dared him to promise spring. He looked to the high window and watched gulls scissor the light. The throne loomed behind him like a threat he had invited into the room and then forgotten to bolt away. "Your grace," said another, slick-haired, already calculating. "All the land waits." John said nothing. He could feel the winter wolf in him sit down on its haunches and lower its head, and beyond the wolf there was fire. Somewhere across a black sea a dragon roared. Not to him, perhaps to no one, perhaps only to the long dead, and the call threaded his bones as if they were flutes. When he finally spoke, his voice seemed to come from the long ride to King's Landing and from a windy parapet above a yard where a boy had once watched his father draw a blade for justice and felt the shape of the world in his ribs. "No," he said. The hall breathed in as one thing. In that silence he heard ash drift. "I will not take that chair. It has taken enough," he said, and nodded toward the warped iron as if it were a coiled beast. They cried out, some with outrage, some with fear for their own reckonings. A few, it turned out, had liked him best as a sword to aim at other men. He did not want their liking. They gave him reasons as deftly as knives. Duty to the realm, duty to the blood he carried unknowingly all his life, duty to the memory of a woman who had flown in fire and died amidst it. He heard them all as one plaint, "Stay, stay, so we can know which way the world turns." "I will go east," he said. The words did not feel like treason. They felt like wind in a long-closed room. "The blood in me came out of the smoking sea. There's a voice there yet, called to her. It calls to me." "Old Valyria is a curse," said a gray-bearded lord who had never in his life crossed so much as the narrow sea. "Plague and demons, and rocks that mutter." "Then let the curse and I speak," John said. He left the hall with a few companions and fewer admirers. It would be said that he had fled a crown, that he had squandered the peace. Yet on the steps outside, people watched him as if they knew a weather change and did not trust their roofs. He moved through them like any other man. Their hands drew back as if he were too hot to touch. On the dock, seawater slapped pilings and the masts pitched in their slow dance, and the sun made a road of hammered brass to the horizon. He thought of a girl with silver hair vanishing into that light on a dragon's back and swallowed the taste of smoke. Davos waited, as he always seemed to, with the practical acceptance of a man who knew the sea's tricks before it played them. "I had a feeling," the Onion Knight said, squinting at the mastheads. "Got us a stout carrack and a surly crew. Surly is better at sea than sad, in my experience." "Thank you," John said. So much of his life had been thanks that could not repay their debt. He lifted his eyes to the gulls wheeling over the mouth of the Blackwater and thought, east. The voyage was long enough to shake loose the last tatters of court from him. Night watches taught him the syllables of the stars, and the ship taught him where to stand when the wind kicked. They touched at Lys and sailed again. Merchants told stories of yellow-eyed men who bled molten coin in nightmares, and singers showed him stitched banners of old dragon kings turned into quilts for the comfort of rich men's beds. Volantis rose from the river like a two-headed idol, one face wild with greed and another with memory. He did not disembark. Men in lacquered armor stood at the harbor mouth counting ships the Triarchs would pretend not to count. "The old blood doesn't like new crowns," Davos said. "Even ones refused." The smoking sea lay beyond, a slate of water that seemed shallow even at its deepest, old mountains drowned in time and held down by rumor. The crew whispered more than they sang. At night, Phosphorescence touched the bow like chalk fingers. They passed a black tower lilting like a drunken king and a chain of islets like a broken necklace. The smell changed. Ash found them even when the wind died. He dreamed the voices first, not in words, but in the way that a hall carries the hoofbeat of horses approaching. He woke with the taste of stone in his mouth. On the 7th morning he sighted towers, jagged as old teeth, rising from the sea's rim. The ruins of Valyria did not loom. They grew slowly as if expecting him to turn away. They anchored off a shore where once a silver palace had spilled its terraces into the water. The palace had melted like sugar. Columns lay in the surf and shivered as the waves touched them. Beyond the black sand, the land rose in petrified ripples and was netted with the roots of buildings long burned into bone. There were no birds. Davos gave orders in a low voice, as if great ears slept beneath the ash. He walked up the strand with his boots filling with grit and heard, with his bones, that the earth was not finished speaking. Steam laced the air in pale threads. Here a road ran like a scar between toppled facades. There a bronze gate fused. Into a sheet by heat lay half-buried like a lid. He paused at a shattered courtyard where a statue stood with its head tilted up to a sky that had failed it. The statue had been a woman. The scales that had once been her dress had run in rivulets down her legs and pooled at her feet. Heat had taught her to melt. When he reached out and touched her foot, the stone was warm. "Your Grace," said Davos, and the old name from a gentler time felt like a hand on his shoulder. "We've no business staying long. The men say their dreams are full of knives." They are. He did not say whose hands held them. It was not conquest that moved him through those streets, but kinship with the broken. He found a colonnade open to the sea, and beyond its steps cut into basalt leading downward. The air had a metallic taste. The steps ended at a cellar that had been a library. Shelves charred into whips. A few black pages fused into planks. Among the wreckage stood a thing like a brazier. No, a candle of green-tinted glass, taller than a man's chest and full of darkness. It did not burn. It seemed to hum without a sound. Jon went to it because he could not nod. He pressed his palm to the chill glass, and for a moment his mind was full of wind. She was there, the girl from the west who had been queen of a night of fire, her hair streaming like penance in a gale. Not a ghost, no forgiving saint, a memory that bit. He felt the dragon pitch under her like a ship taking a wave and tasted a sky he had never flown. Then she was gone, the wind too. In its wake remained another presence, old as the chambers of the earth. A door he had not known stood closed in him opened, and heat spilled through. "Jon," said a voice, no voice. "Aegon," names like the lay of a sword across his tongue. "Child of ice and ash, you left a chair of knives to seek a hearth. Strike flint." He did not ask who spoke. He withdrew his hand. The green candle was still a dark river caught in glass. Davos stood with his arms folded and his mouth in a fisherman's line of doubt. "Well, not yet," Jon said. They made a camp at the sea edge where the air moved. Fires licked driftwood and cracked it into sparks that fled and died. The men sang, because silence invited imaginings to sit in their laps and whisper old women's tales. Jon walked from the firelight and the gullied streets and up a path of vitrified gravel to a ridge where dead vineyards once stair-stepped the slope. Below lay a low basin, a natural bowl of rock. In it, the ash lay deeper. The earth was warmer there, and in the basin's center stood a squat hall like a buried heart pushing up from the ground. The doors had split and fallen. The hinges were blobs. He entered to a smell that was not quite char and not quite earth. A tannic breath, like cellars he had known in Winterfell when the apples and turnips slept out the snow. The roof had gone in one corner, and a slice of afternoon fell across the floor, catching dust motes that turned to gold and went dark again. He stepped into the gold and felt it fall on his face like a benediction and a warning. The floor was not floor but a ring of blackened benches around a pit. He stood at its lip and looked in. The pit was lined in something that had been glazed and cracked, a mosaic gone blind. In its hollow lay 6 shapes, each the size of a sleeping dog, char and shell. His heart thrummed once like a drum struck with care, and the sound traveled into the pit and lay down beside the 6 shapes and waited with them. He climbed in, because that was what the world had decided he would do when his father had bent to clean his sword in snow, and the boy who would be Jon Snow had not flinched from the blood. He knelt with ash climbing his knees and touched one of the shapes. Shell. Char. Layer beneath layer like onion skins burned. He pressed until brittle gave. Under the char was hardness, smooth and cool as river rock. Eggs, he said to the emptiness. His voice made the ash quiver. You're late. He brought them to the camp piece by piece, swaddled in tarred canvas, held against his ribs as a man might carry a jar of his hearth fire through a winter storm. The crew muttered afresh, seeing the shapes unveiled in the light of the fire. No, Davos told them, and there was mercy in his tired laugh. If the tales are true, talk softly. If they're false, talk even softer. Jon set the 6 eggs in a circle around the green candle the men had hauled up from the cellar with grunts and salt curses. The candle was black as the sea at midnight. He could not bear to set a true fire beneath the shells. Heat without flame, the presence had whispered, and he did not know if that meant the candle or the heart in him that had learned fire by losing it. In the end, he built braziers of charcoal and placed them at the circumference, and the men heated iron tongs and set them near to glow. We'll bake ourselves like crabs, Davos said, lying on his back in the heat like a man in a fever hut. On the 3rd night, the glass candle burned. No beak woke, no spark jumped. One moment it was a column of green-black silence. The next it was light, pale as moonglow caught and tamed, not bright so much as deep. It did not cast shadows the way honest fire did. Rather, it thinned the dark until it stood aside. Jon felt the back of his neck prickle, as wolves do when the wind carries the sound of something heavy moving in brush. He looked into the candle's heart, and distance was suddenly a thing men had invented to pretend they were not kin. He saw a city of ships with herons on their prows, and men in rough cloaks lying awake under the ice of a far northern sky. He saw black robes moving over water like beetles, faces smooth as masks and more honest, and a hall of merchants in Volantis where the floor was a map and men walked on it as if that made them kings of everywhere. He saw a dragon as a hill with wings, sleeping on a plain of obsidian as if it had chosen to be par. Tea of the rock rather than the sky. When he looked down, 6 eggs lay like 6 winters. He did not know the words of the old tongue, but his heart did. He sang. The sound came raw at first and then steadied, and in it there was the iron smell of blood and the sweetness of crushed grass under a long-legged horse, and the bloom of heat in a room built to dine a family who had no reason to doubt the harvest. He sang to eggs and to possession and to loss. He sang to winter and the mercy of a thaw that only ever lasted exactly long enough. The men lay very still, staring as if the sound pinned them to their cloaks. On the 5th night, the shells cracked. There was little grandeur in it, no trumpets or omens written in the smoke, only the small wet work of creatures deciding to live. The first to break pushed its snout into light with the obstinacy of a stone thrust into a stream's current. It sneezed ash like a child sneezes flour and made a sound that was not yet a roar and would never be a chirp. Its eye met Jon's. It was gold where it should be black, and in its pupil he saw himself standing under a hanging sky. When he reached a hand toward it, it snapped without malice, because that is what a thing born of teeth does. They came out one by one, each with its own stubbornness. One black as coal with a slick green undersheen, one bronze like a bell in a temple, one pale as the belly of a fish with flakes of silver that made it gleam like hoarfrost, one red so deep it might have been wine. The 6th cracked slowly and then all at once, and the creature within uncurled with a tremor that shook its still soft wings. He laughed then, a quiet, just for him laugh, because he had not expected joy to return to him without debt. The smallest dragon, the pale one, climbed his forearm, needles for feet, and tasted his throat with its hot breath, which already wanted to be flame. Davos swore softly. 7 save us, he said, and then, because he was Davos, he smiled. Or perhaps 7 won't trouble themselves. They made a rookery of the ruin. Men set to work because work was what made them forget where they were. They fetched water from a spring that tasted of iron and eggs, and they learned to bake bread in pits where the earth was already an oven. John walked the rim of the basin and the streets beyond and learned the city's ways, how the ground tricked feet, where the air lay and where it moved, which stones were only stones and which hummed like bees. At night he watched the dragons sleep in a tangle as if they had been born from the same breath and wanted to keep it between them. He named them in his heart without speaking the names aloud, because some names were prayers and some were boasts and some were both. In the night one of them came and spoke the name they used for him, Azor Ahai, like he might be a sword. He let the name fall. "I will not be your tool," he said. "You must be someone's," the priest said. "The dark is not lazy. I have been winter and fire both," John said. "I will be my own." Worse than priests, better than letters, came the knives. The first assassin wore the sea like a cloak and came up from the water through the belly of a rotten boat. The second cooked in their camp for 3 days and made soup that felt like memory until he took a fishbone and slipped it through a guard's throat. The third was a boy who looked like the squire of some Valentine trader and who did not blink when John looked at him too long. When he died, his face went smooth as a pebble. He sent the bodies back on boats that drifted toward the currents that would take them to whatever city had bought them. It did not occur to him to send a letter. He was not negotiating. He was fertilizing the rumor of himself. The dragons grew. They grew like storms gathering. Their bones made sounds when they stretched. Their breath thickened. The pale one, he called her haze in his thoughts, for the way her scales caught morning, for the way she made the air around her seem thinner, learned first to leap from a boulder and open her wings to the wind. She fell the first times the way a man falls from dreams, and did not mind. The red one whined, heavy and angry, bit through the chains they had set to keep him from climbing along the camp ropes and setting the sails on fire. "He has your temper," Davos said, and John said no. But only because he did not want to think of himself as something that might burn. They found, among the ruins, a hall of smit. Not all had been consumed. In the shadows were benches with clamps and molds blacker than other black. On the walls, runs of sigils carved shallow as hesitation. The Kohoric woman with the black ring touched them reverently and said the words might have been recipes once. She spoke of a craft found in light and lost in catastrophe, of steel that pretended to remember the sun. "With the heat under this ground," she said, "it might be we can teach metal again." "What do you want for it?" John asked. "Protection," she said simply, "from men who have less patience than I do. And a share." He nodded. Bargains could be clean. The dragons watched as the first billets went into the earth ovens and came out like wet wood, and men hammered until the sound was a drumbeat for living. He walked among the sparks and felt none land on him. He set his hands to the bellows once and listened to the way the fire changed its voice when he asked it to. Colonists came, because a dragon's shadow could make men cowards or pioneers depending on what hunger gnawed at them. A cohort from Lys with sunburnt backs came to cut grapes from wild vines and found that their wine tasted like smoke and stone and sold for triple because men will buy any story if it is poured into a bottle. A group of mountain folk from Norvos came to quarry basalt blocks for temples that would pretend God had foundations. A family from Pentos came with baskets of fig seedlings and stories about a daughter who had run away on a caravan and married a sellsword in Myrine and laughed. Men with nothing came and found that old Valyria had a place for nothing if it was offered without complaint. He set guards and set rules. He took little and gave little, and it made them trust him more than if he had taken more and given more. He wrote a letter to the Lady of Winterfell and did not send it. In it he spoke of ash that smelled like pennies and of moons that rose too fast. He told her that he had seen wolves in waves and that he had not forgotten the sound boots make on fresh snow, the tiny hush after each step. He told her that he could feel winter even here where the earth sweated, and that the knowledge made him kinder to the men who complained of the heat. He told her that he was not coming back. He folded the letter and put it in the glass candle's base. The candle burned on, unbothered by paper. War came quietly, at first as shortages. Men whose trade routes bent around the smoking sea found them suddenly infested with pirates who bore no colors and stabbed maps. prices rose in Volantis. Men roasted their dinners over maps. The Triarchs voted, as they liked to do, and sent emissaries with smiles tough as cured leather. "You will agree," they said, "to do nothing. You will build nothing that frightens men. You will keep your dragons chained and your smiths content with small things. You will remember that Valyria is dead and keep it so, in honor of the dead. You will accept an escort for ships that travel near your shore." Jon heard their conditions and set his hand, without looking, on the pale dragon's neck where she lay like a cat along the warmed stone. "I cannot keep the dead dead," he said. "They keep their own counsel." "Your presence is a provocation," the emissary said tightly. "There are laws on the Rhoyne older than your line." "Then let them flow around me," Jon said. They returned with parchment thicker, with seals that watched. He did not unroll it. He bent and set it in the brazier where bright coals drowsed, and a slow ribbon of smoke carried Volantis into the heat that rose from the stones all on its own. That night, sails appeared on the horizon, more than the harbor had ever held while it was alive. He counted them and did not hurry. The battle, to call it that felt like vanity, was a weather event. The Volantene ships came in a line to hem the bay and found it too shallow for their hulks. Lighter galleys came behind flinging pots of fire. Someone had remembered the old formulas, or thought they had, and a slick burned on the water's skin. Wind fell. Men shouted in small voices. Jon walked out on the black sand where the waves spit foam high onto his boots and raised his arm like a man asking a dog to sit. 6 shadows tightened and unfurled. They did not roar at first. The sound they made was smaller, more respectful somehow. It reminded him of the way torches sigh when brought into a great dark chamber. Then, when their shadows fell over hulls painted with tigers and the men on those decks looked up and knew that their prayers had been both answered and misunderstood, the dragons spoke properly. The red one made a sound like a bell struck with a hammer wrapped in wool. The black-green one's cry was a plain of obsidian splitting. Hayes's voice was a keen that tasted like salt. They fell upon the fire on the water and took it in, burned it hotter, made it their own, threw it back. Jon watched the world reorder itself around heat. He did not give many orders. He told men to drag their boats up where the sand was thicker. He told Davos not to get dead, and he told himself not to admire. When the first of the larger galleys caught with a sound like applause and men leaped and did not all come up again, he felt a little sick and was glad of it. The dragons made work of wood. Arrows rose at them like curses and fell like old men. A scorpion bolt struck Wine's wing and punched through. The dragon shrieked, and in the shriek was a child's complaint. Unfair. Jon's vision went white around its edges. He did not tell Wine to be braver. He told him to be wise, and the dragon understood that somehow, and banked away and came again meaner. The Volantene line broke, because ships are cowards once they are aflame. The little ones turned first and made new currents in their panic, and the big ones, stubborn as old power, tried to hold a shape that the sea did not want. A few made for open water and might have made it if the wind had en. OT changed, because the smoking sea has opinions and sometimes voices them. Men in the shallows clung to pieces of their ships, as if wood had adopted them, and dragged them to shore with faces green with fear and skin stained with something other than soot. Jon had them given water and cloaks and sent them inland. "Why?" asked a guard with a scar under his left eye that sharpened when he frowned. "Because if they go back, they will brag," Jon said. "And if we keep them, they will be quiet and breed. I am not ready for either." After, when smoke lay in the wind like a veil with too much wetting in it, he went with Hayes to the basalt ridge and watched the boats burn until they had nothing left to say. He thought of King's Landing and the day the bells had rung, and how men had not known what that meant until they did. He thought of a hall with a chair like a threat, and of the relief in him at having said no to it. He thought of letters not sent. "You have made enemies," Davos said, climbing up with breath that whistled tiredly. "If we're counting, they're bigger than we are and better supplied and more politically blessed." "They will come again," Jon agreed. "Aye," Davos said and spat ash. "And you'll answer with fire and then with letters and then with laws. Be careful the laws aren't worse than the fire." He nodded. What else could a man do when told to be careful but nod? The dragons grew again after the battle, as if victory were meat they could eat. Their wings freckled with scars. The smiths learned to temper longer pieces without making them brittle, and a man with clever hands from the Basilisk Isles built a gear that let them press designs into red metal like signets pressed wax. The colonists complained about weather and then about each other, and then stopped complaining because complaining became boring in the face of a heat that went nowhere and a horizon that did not respect patience. Children ran with reed whistles. They skinned their knees on glassy stone and did not mind because it was different to skinning their knees on ordinary dirt. On a market day, John walked among the stalls and tasted a fruit that had grown on a bush coaxed to live in a place that once had decided death was a better tenant. And the juice ran down his wrist and he laughed again. He flew at last when Hayes told him to. It was not ceremony. He had not wanted trumpets or men watching with mouths open. He did not want to be a story in that way. He went to the ridge at dawn when the sky was a bruised peach and the earth was a bed where a fevered patient turned. Hayes lay there already, awake since the night like soldiers are awake in snowstorms. He put his hand on her neck and felt the tremor of blood. He swung his leg over as if taking a horse. He could not help that, and settled into the hollows between her spines, and she rose under him like a question asked and answered at once. The air was a hand that flattened him. The ground fell away as if it had decided he was rude. He learned at once how much a man's body wants to be loved by earth, how quickly it complains when lifted. His eyes watered. He did not close them. The ruin lay beneath like the shell of an egg cracked by the beak of a sun. The sea was a hide. He felt Hayes's body move under him, every adjustment of muscle a sentence he did not need translated. He spoke to her without words. He asked for the left shore and she gave it. He thought of height and she took it as a dare. When he looked down, he saw men like points on a game board and their smoke like barns in winter. He saw the glass candle from above and it was like a planted spear. He had known he would cry up there. He did not. Instead, he breathed like a man at last in the climate of his lungs, and the breath was of heat and salt and old stone and the faint sweetness of a citadel garden where a woman with white hair had once walked and been young and not yet judged by the loudness of her fires. The sun rose and the scales under him turned into mirrors and then into weapons. He laughed and the wind and his laugh were kin. He could have flown west. The thought came as surely as hunger. He could have taken his shadow back to men who had given him their eyes. He could have turned truer than a raven to a woman with red-brown hair ruling a country of walls and mines and told her, "Look." He banked instead south, where the islands stitched the smoking sea into a net, and saw fishermen's skiffs and the way they held still when his shadow fell. When he landed, he was trembling, not with fear but with having been poured into a shape he had not known his body had. The ground rose to meet him like a host. He slid down Hayes's shoulder and leaned his forehead against her jaw and let the world and his pulse find each other again. "You're a fool," Davos said cheerfully, as if he had caught him in some boyish mischief. "You're also exactly as you were born." The letters changed. Bravos wrote, oblique as dawnlight, offering advice that sounded like threats and threats that sounded like advice. Cohor sent men with black rings who asked for wood and got stone. Volantis wrote in a hand that had learned humility badly and suggested that trade could heal what fire had dared. "Trade will heal what men truly want healed," John said, and agreed to nothing. He had learned to love refusing. The priests built a shrine of red stone and set their brazier before it and taught children songs with too many rhymes for fire. He let it be. He sent men who murdered for coin back for more lessons. He sent a letter, not a boast, to Winterfell at last, short. "I am well, I am making a place, I remember the sound of ravens in snow." He sent another, longer, unwiser, and did not post it. The candle took that one too at last, when he saw his own names in it and did not like the way they sounded. When the second battle came, it did not come with ships. It came with men in white masks who walked through streets pretending to add me. Ruins while their hands measured the weight of knives. It came with poison in wine that had tasted like smoke and stone. It came with a man from Myr who had once loved a boy and who now had a mouth too small for his grief, and who was brave enough to try to murder a king he did not acknowledge. It came with a woman from Volantis who had borne a child who had died of a cough and who had been told by a priest that a dragon had stolen the breath. It came with reasonable men who preferred the world arranged as it had been because their place in it had been comfortable. John remembered the hall with the iron chair and all the voices telling him what began with duty. He put on leather and a breastplate that had not quite learned the old sheen yet. He kissed Hayes's snout and told her not to be a martyr. He stepped into streets where ash had settled since the dawns of men. The battle made a sound like rain on slate because knives are rain if enough fall. He thought of Winterfell when he swung his sword. He thought of the wall and of brothers who had been better than him and worse. He killed men who would not have killed him if they had not been hired, and men who would have killed him if he had still refused them, and men who looked like their sons. He killed and kept the part of him that mourned alive, because that part was the last temple he believed in. After, he went to the glass candle and set his hand upon it and saw, through a swarming fog, a shore of gray stones and a castle that was not Winterfell, and a woman standing with her hand on a parapet, looking east like a promise. He did not call her name. He waited to see if she would turn. She did not. He took his hand away and went out into a day so bright that he could not see the smoke until he tasted it. He grew older. The dragons grew into their mysteries. He learned their other ways, the way they slept with one eye to the sea, the way they hated the sound of certain pipes and loved the smell of a fruit that did not grow here unless men knelt to coax it. He learned the law of a place that is rebuilding. It is always almost done and always beginning. He learned that men prefer their kings slightly elsewhere. He took no crown because crowns were weights that bent necks until eyes saw ground. He wore a plain circlet of iron at ceremonies because the merchants needed to tally something and call it authority. He came, at last, to think of the old streets not as ruins but as paths. Children took dragon bone and carved toys from it, and those toys had sharp edges. Men sat outside in the evenings and watched the steam from the earth drift and fade, and their talk lowered its guard and began to include the future. The smiths quenched blades in a brine made with certain herbs and sand scraped from a place where the ground hummed louder. They did not call their work by the old name. They called it simply good. In the market one day, a woman from Tyrosh haggled over a bolt of cloth dyed with a root that grew redder here, and when she looked up and saw a dragon move like shadow over the upper street, she did not scream. She reached for her purse and paid because comfort has purchase. He kept counsel with men he trusted and women who mistrusted him correctly. He let the priests burn their fires and did not let them set law. He learned the slow grammar of trade, how to say yes and mean not yet, how to say not yet and mean maybe, how to say maybe and mean yes. He learned that justice in a hot country moves more slowly and must be walked in the morning. He judged disputes over irrigation ditches and murder and adultery and the price of salt. He made mistakes in public and apologized in public because hiding error is how kings become stories about themselves. He went, sometimes, to the basin where he had found the eggs and sat on the cracked benches and listened. The earth still spoke. Its voice was lower than it had been, less frantic, more given to long pauses, like an old man who has found the right speed for his heart. He put his hand on the ground and felt heat like a sleeping thing that trusts its own bed. He lived, which is no small thing in a world that mistakes surviving for a trick. One night, a storm came out of the southwest, the kind that turns the sky into purple glass and then throws it down upon the sea. He stood at the shore and let rain slap his face hard enough to sting. Lightning made skeletons of the old palaces for a breath at a time. Hayes landed beside him because she loved his stubbornness and because she wanted to know what he watched. He did not speak. He thought of the hall with the chair and of a morning when he had said no. He thought of all the men since who had said that his no had been a kind of yes to something worse, and of all the women who had decided quietly that it had been permission to be different. He thought of the dead and did not make them saints. Dawn found the storm gone and the sea new cleaned. It also found a ship, small and battered and stubborn, nosing into the bay like a stray dog. It carried on its deck more children than men and more women than arms. They were from the disputed lands, hungry and full of the prose of survival. He stood and watched them come, and they watched him and the dragons beyond him with steady eyes empty of wonder because wonder had never fed them. He lifted his hand by way of greeting. They did not kneel. He did not ask them to. In the years that came after, men told stories about the day he had refused a crown and chosen a ruin. They told them badly. Men always do. They made it about pride or about love for a dead queen or about prophecy. Because prophecy is a cloth that covers any table, no matter how badly it's been built. He sometimes corrected them and sometimes let the story go where it wanted. The truth was smaller and bigger. He had gone where he could do the least harm while doing the most good he knew how to do. He had gone where the ground still had a fever and where he could set a wet cloth to its brow. Once, years later, he flew high enough that the sea was a lid lifted off the world. He did not mean to. The air was thin and the cold caught his teeth like mischief. Hayes labored beautifully and took him up and up until his thoughts thinned too and could hold almost nothing. From there, everything men said was important was the size of a fruit pit. He could see, faint and stubborn, the line of the wall as a stitch at the world's hem. He thought he heard, in the whine of that height, a wolf howl. He let himself imagine it, because a man is allowed to decorate the heights with what he misses. He came down when Hayes told him he must. He came down to a shore scraped clean by wind and a city that became less a ruin each time he walked it. He was not a king. He was a man to whom men brought their problems, and to whom children brought their best stones. He lay his head down at night not on a pillow embroidered with sigils but on simple linen washed in a basin by hands that did not recognize the profundity of the work. He slept. Sometimes he dreamed of the hall and the iron and men conjuring reasons like a stage conjurer conjures birds. Sometimes he dreamed of snow. More often he woke to the sound of a dragon shifting its weight on a roof and to a day in which he would decide where a new aqueduct should bend and who should be punished for setting a warehouse fire to cover theft and what to do with a letter from a queen who ruled a country of cautious memory. When he died, it was not in war. It was after a fever that came with a spring sandstorm, and which he fought the way he fought most things now, with footwork and cunning rather than brute endurance. He lay in a room that had once been a counting house and which now had windows. He watched light move on the wall. He sent for Davos and for the smith with the clever hands and for the Kohoric woman with the ring and for a boy who had once run away from his father's tannery and had arrived with empty hands and now held the keys to the granary as if they might bite him. He sent for no priests. He sent for no poets. He told them, simply, where the ground hummed most and which ditches would flood in the next rain, and which men would betray if too much sugar were offered, and which dragons might be tempted by meat when they should choose fish. He told them to take care of children because children remember with their hands. Hayes's head came through the window like a moon too close. She breathed out and the heat of it set his hair to moving. He lifted his hand and touched her lip and thought of flying and of refusal and of a boy with a bastard's name learning to walk in snow as if it were a kind of training for everything. He had chosen a ruin because it was honest about what it was. He had made of it a place where men could be honest about what they wanted: bread, water, work, a story that did not shame them when told at night. He had traded a throne of knives for a hearth, and the hearth had demanded more of him than any crown would have, to understand what heat is for, and how to share it, and when to let it die to protect sleepers. The last breath he took tasted of basalt and fruit and ash and salt, and it tasted of a promise kept to no one in particular. In the room beyond, children began to bicker over a toy carved of dragon bone, and stopped when a woman told them both to hush and share. Outside, the ground hummed like a deep beating drum, and the city, which had been dead, exhaled and continued its work of living. They carried him to the basin at sundown, when the heat left its fingerprints on the stones and then lost interest, and laid him upon a bier of planks planed from ship timber and pegged with nails hammered in the smith's hall during a quiet hour when no one had wanted to speak. The basin still held its deeper warmth, the old heart of the earth knitting itself into sleep after another day of pulse, and the men and women gathered about the cracked benches as if it were a theater and they were about to be instructed in something that would make sense of their own pulses. They said no prayers at first. Words were always the slowest to agree to grief. Hayes came last. She had circled above the city since noon, drawing an ever-widening ring as if she could find an altitude where the fact ceased to be true. When she dropped, it was without ceremony, a stone surrendering to gravity only when tired of argument. Her shadow crossed the basin and set every head to bowing in spite of habit. She put her face to him with a gentleness learned in years of landing amid men who were smaller than her mistakes, and breathed him in until the air of the place hid, embarrassed. Then she lifted her head and made a sound that had never been a roar and never would be. A sound the city had heard only a few times in its long aching. The long, bleak call a dragon gives to the thing it cannot burn away. The boy with the granary keys held them so tightly his knuckles went white and then red. The Kahoric woman stood with her hands behind her back, ring catching the sinking light, her eyes on the planks as if she were memorizing their grain for a task she would be asked to perform tomorrow with no time to hesitate. Davos stood a little apart, because he had always preferred to feel the weather before it got to other men. He looked like a good knife left in the salt, pitted but still sharp enough to make a man cautious. There were words in the end, because the living needed the furniture of ceremony to stop the floor from giving way beneath them. The red priests burned their brazier and called him the sword finished with its work. The old woman from Norvos who had sold pears all these years lifted her chin and said in a voice of broad vowels that he had been kind to children and to men who lied to themselves, which was the only kindness that ever caused trouble worth having. A young blacksmith cried in an unhandsome way and promised, choking, to remember how he had laughed in the market when the juice from a fruit ran down his wrist. The boy with the keys said nothing and had to be told, later, that his silence had sounded like fidelity. At moonrise, they took up the bier and carried him to the sea. The path was the path he had walked the first day, the one with the vitrified gravel that made your tread sound as if you were grinding glass. Men set the pyre upon a skiff that had known better voyages, wedged the planks with more wood, and soaked it with a little oil saved from the olives grown in the angry soil above the spring. Hayes watched, her pupils wide as wells in the lamplight, until Davos looked up at her and shook his head once, telling her something without words. Not now. When they pushed the skiff out, the current took it like a host who had already put out another plate and found himself unhungry. John drifted toward the horizon that had once hovered like a threat and had learned to be a promise. A young fisherman who had lost his father to the smoking sea the year before took the torch to the end of the pier, and in his eyes were two storms, one spent, one to come. He looked to Davos because Davos had always been the sea's interpreter on land, and Davos nodded because there was nothing else to do. The torch arced, and for a moment its reflection on the water made the old palaces look like they were once more full of candlelight. Fire took the skiff in slow, deliberate licks, a dog with a bone it has decided to savor, and the city watched until the black triangle sank and the smoke unwound into the larger night like something finally remembering its way home. They walked back up from the shore with their mouths salt and set about the work grief always leaves, sorting the world that remains. Davos slept 1 hour and then went to the counting house turned council room and sat down in the chair he had always chosen, third from the window, where he could see the harbor if he leaned and still hear men properly if he relaxed. The Kahoric woman came in with the ring catching pale dawn. The boy with the keys came with a ledger that looked heavier than his arm. The priest with the quietest eyes came and sat without moving the brazier closer to him. Men and women with the habit of opinion came, and then those who had never learned it but had been forced to wear it lately, and the room began to fill with the breath of governance. "We've no king," said the woman who sold pears, uninvited but steady. "We are as we were before he told us our names to ourselves. Only now we know them. No king," Davos agreed, "and no throne, which is a mercy. We have a place that needs a head to nod when men want to be sure they've said their piece to someone who has heard them. A council," the smith said, as if naming it fixed the legs on it. "Not like the ones in the free cities. One that doesn't pretend it is a king when a king would be inconvenient." The Kahoric woman lifted her hand a little. "We have the beginnings of 3 things that make neighbors ask permission. Food that comes in regularity, fire that minds itself, and metal that is better at remembering what it was told than ordinary metal. We will be petitioned. We will be warned. We will be tested. The measure of us will be in whom we feed first, whom we burn not at all, and what we put that metal to." Davos rubbed a thumb along the table grain. "He told me where the ground hums louder. He told me which ditches will flood next rain. He told me who will betray for sugar. He didn't tell me how to be him. I'm too old for the job and too stubborn to be frightened into saying yes." "Good," said the pear seller. "Being him is not the job. Being many is." They formed the council out of habit and necessity and a superstition that had learned to bring water, and at first it sat awkwardly, as if the chairs did not know whether to apologize to one another or hiss. The boy with the keys, whose name no one seemed to remember until the pear woman said it aloud, Shy, took the granary accounts and learned to count with his mouth closed. The Kohoric woman took the smiths and their secrets and began to write a book that had no words in it, only the shapes of heat. Davos took the harbor and the ears of men who came in with sails that wanted conversation. The priest with the quiet eyes took the disputes that had nothing to do with gods and everything to do with men waking up beside people they loved less on certain mornings. Hayes did not leave. For weeks she lay on the flat roof beyond the counting house and watched the harbor with the patience of a cliff. Children began to climb the stairs of that building with the fatalism of fisher kittens, bringing her offerings she did not want. A fish too dry at the edges, a strand of shells that clattered against her tooth and made her sneeze, the skull of a rat saved from a cat. She accepted each with the careful anger of grief. Sometimes she lifted her head and stared toward the northwest, toward the faint stitch at the world's hem that a man had once seen from too high, and her throat tightened, and steam puffed from her nostrils, and the glass candle in its stand inside the counting house made a sound no one but the Kohoric woman heard. Winter sent a wind, a dry-boned thing that came despite the sea and went inland to sit under eaves until the sun convinced it to move on. The colonists pulled their cloaks tighter and quarreled in smaller voices. Trade bent and re-straightened itself like rushes. The storms ran out of fresh anger and began to rummage in the old. The first Volantine ships to arrive under a flag of truce looked like men who had learned regret but hadn't had time to master it. The emissaries wore their hair a little shorter, as if that might make them seem younger and less guilty of yesterday. "He is dead," said the emissary in a voice that could not locate triumph in itself. "We had thought that we would be weaker without him." Davos finished kindly. "We are different without him. Different is not a kind of weak." The emissary swallowed. "The Triarchs would have me speak of corridors through which trade might be permitted to pass without fear of interruption." "Fear is a variable," the Kohoric woman said softly from the shadow by the window. "Corridors are lines men draw on water. We prefer channels. The sea agrees with channels. Taxes, then." The emissary tried, pride coming to rescue him from honesty. "Of a breadth that does not offend the harvest and does not appease men whose meal is making tables out of other men," the priest said calmly, "can be discussed." Thus did the city learn diplomacy in a room that had once smelled of sums and now smelled of men trying to become numbers and failing. The glass candle burned most nights now. No one lit it. It simply consented to work after dusk as if offended by the day's brightness. The Kohoric woman sat with her black ring and taught the boy Shy to sit in front of it with his hands flat on his knees and his breath the only dog he had to keep on a leash. "The trick is not to look for what you want," she told him. "The trick is to let what is most impatient to be seen have its turn, and then to ask it if it is finished. If it says yes, it is a liar. Listen to the liars longest. They have the most to reveal without meaning to. What if I see something that wants me?" Shy asked, not fearfully but as a man might ask about the weight of a sack of grain. "Then you ask it for a price," she said. "If it names one you can pay without asking others to starve, consider it." He learned quickly because he had learned quickly to feed men and because hunger and vision both obeyed similar rules. He learned to see currents as if they were ropes a hand could throw, to count ships by the scuff marks on their oars before they graced the horizon, to distinguish the white of legitimate sails from the white of pretense. He saw twice a woman in a castle on a gray shore who looked east and whose mouth, when it opened to say a practical thing to a guard, almost formed his name and then did not. He told no one. He learned that certain truths when spoken became gossip and when kept became duty. The first year without John closed itself like a wound that prefers a scar to full healing. People in the market began to tell stories that left off ending with his name and began ending with phrases like, "And so we did this," or, "And that is why there is no more quarrel about the ditch above the pear seller's house." And because Hayes will not eat the dogs if we feed her the fish heads, so stop whining and cut them properly. The priests learned to be large in their own houses and small in the street. The smiths learned to work under supervised greed. Their hands longed to exceed instruction and were permitted to as long as they came back afterward and taught the trick to apprentices who had not yet ruined enough iron to be allowed pride. Valantis tried once more with force. It came quiet, as men who have learned to be quiet do when they have forgotten the reasons. A flotilla not flying tigers, escorted by fishermen more impressed by coin than by current, slid into the southern channel on a night when the moon was a slice and every cat in the city complained because it knew it would be asked to eat fewer rats tomorrow. Shai sat with his hands on his knees and saw it by the way one boat's sail did not breathe, and he stood and said a single word, south, and the city moved like a school of fish. They found that fighting without him was not the same as fighting with him. They found also that it was not completely different. Davos commanded from the pier with his old smell of brine, and his curses were the right size for the men he commanded, significant but not theatrical. Hayes rose, and with her rose the others, the red-bellied wine now fretted with scars and meaner in his age, the black-green spinner who loved the smell of fish and had to be called back twice so he would not go to the market instead. They fell upon the boats in patient anger. Valantis had hired men who did not want to die without first learning why. They learned under a sky that did not care why. The city lost 3 fighters and a boy who could swim too well for his own sense. And afterward the pyres smoked with a different tone of grief, one that mutters, "I am not done counting what I have left." Bravos came proper in the 2nd year, with masks polished and voices modulated to flatter. They brought credit as if it were an exotic spice, the scent of which might make men forget the cost of inhaling. They offered to build a long stone quay with their own men and to charge their own fees for its use. Davos listened until his jaw tightened and the Cohoric woman's ring spun a quarter turn in the lantern light, and then he smiled in a way that made a Bravosi consider the age of his shoes. "We will build our own quay of basalt that knows this ground and will not listen to fog," he said. "But we will buy your ropes and your saltfish and your little bells that you say keep the wind on the right side of the mast. And we will rent out our dragon's shadows when your ships leave at noon. For luck. There is no market for shadows," the banker observed, missing the humor like a coin lost between planks. "There is a market for stories you can say you bought," Davos said. "We know our neighbors." The basalt quay rose in sections like a sentence written by men who did not love grammar but had learned not to abuse it. The smiths laid iron spikes that did not rust and did not act like ordinary iron when asked to live in salt. Children combed the shore for sea glass to decorate the new bollards, and when a woman from Pentos complained that this was frivolity in a harbor, the pear seller told her, "We are allowed to make an argument now and then that is not strictly necessary to feeding a man." The Book of Heat Gre. The Cohoric woman wrote it with hands that never shook, even when the Cohoric men who had followed at a distance finally arrived, eyes like quenched blades, and stood with the posture of men who had not asked for permission before and had no plans to start. They presented her with a second black ring and an expression meant to remind her of a temple. She looked at the ring for a long breath and then placed it in the palm of the youngest apprentice. "He'll need something to carry that will keep him from touching the molds before the molds say yes," she said dryly. "The book is the temple. It lives here." And she touched her breastbone and then the wall where stamps of heat had darkened the basalt in the shape of diligent ghosts. The Cohoric men looked offended and impressed in equal measure, which is the proper posture of learning. Hayes began to fly farther. Sometimes she disappeared for a day and returned with her scales dusted by pollen from flowers no one had seen growing in the ruin, as if she had found a garden and refused to share it yet. Once she went north and came back 3 days later with a cut across her right wing like a grave accent in Old Valyrian. She would not let anyone touch it, but let a girl of 8 brush the scales near it with the gentleness of a child who has learned to pick splinters from a younger brother. The cut healed. Shai dreamed, that night, standing before the glass candle, of ice that did not want to be remembered and of men who preferred not to say the name of a wolf out loud. He wrote nothing down, which was the correct way to honor an old secret. Children who had never seen King's Landing learned to say the name as something that happened to other people. Maps drawn in schoolrooms on scraped slate put Valyria at the center not because it was arrogant but because it was honest. That was where their bread came from, their smoke, their stories. The oldest of these children grew into men and women whose hands remembered how to make something out of heat that would not be lied to, and whose eyes did not widen when emissaries sniffed. They courted, fought, wanted, lied, apologized, paid debts, failed to pay others. The city developed an afternoon habit. At the hour when the heat retreated to gossip, people went to their doorways and watched the plume from the spring and spoke of the weather with more affection than superstition. In the 4th year, winter sent a ship that had not been asked for. It came from the sunset sea, from far beyond the usual shuttling of gossip and goods. Its hull was higher and slacker, its sail patched with cloth that had learned other suns. On its deck stood men whose faces had the weather baked into them, and among them a woman in a gray cloak whose hair had gone white in a way that looked like decision rather than time. When she stepped onto the basalt quay, Hayes lifted her head from the counting house roof and stopped breathing for 3 heartbeats. The woman walked with a limp hidden from no one and the stubbornness of a winter storm come down from hills that have no patience for braiding men's hair. Davos walked to meet her because old men should greet old weather. They stood a yard apart and watched each other remember. The woman's mouth failed at a smile and then succeeded. "I had letters from a man who forgot to post most of them," she said, and her voice was a low fire. "I came to see the ones he wrote by walking." "You came a long way," Davos observed, because he liked to leave obvious truth in the room for luck. "I have a long memory," she said, "and I am tired of reading my brother's name in other men's mouths." They did not say John's name because there are friendships that prefer the shape left by silence. They spoke instead of ditches and aqueducts, and the way the ground hums more in late summer, and how children somersault in the new baths though told not to because children are as they have always been. She walked the market with her hand tucked behind her back like a lady who has refused ceremony and accepted work, and bought a bolt of smoky cloth and a pear and a knife. She stood at the basin at evening and put her hand to the warm ground and closed her eyes and said nothing, which was correct. Hayes came down from the counting house and approached step by step as if negotiating with a crater. The woman lifted her hand slowly and touched the dragon's jaw and then pressed her forehead to it. And for a moment the city stood with their breath held because humility is rare and expensive and you do not interrupt when you see it paid. She stayed a fortnight and sat twice at the council table, once to listen and once to explain, gently, how to end a feud that had begun with a cart and ended with 2 families not speaking. She did not speak of castles or of banners. She watched Hayes fly and watched the children watch Hayes fly. She went to the smith's hall and looked at the Book of Heat without reading it, like a woman who respects the sight of a closed door. On the morning she left, she stood on the quay with her cloak clasped and said to Davos, "He did the right thing, didn't he, when he said no?" Davos rubbed his face and bought himself a heartbeat by pretending a grit had lodged in his eye. He had been a smuggler too long not to lie when needed. He had been a man too long not to tell the truth when it hurt best. A man can do the right thing and leave his friends with hard work. He did both. We forgive the first because it brought the second. She nodded, which was the only courtesy pride can offer truth. When the ship slid out into the channel, Hayes flew an arc above it and cast a shadow that made the crew touch their foreheads and the woman lift her eyes to memorize the curve. Then the ship found the pulse of the smoking sea and let itself be carried toward the west, looking like a stubborn word in a sentence that had mostly agreed to end. A red summer followed, a season when fruit piled itself into Pyram. IDs on stall boards and men who had not been meant to live so long found themselves feeling like liars at their own kitchen tables. Fire bit 2 warehouses and was bitten back. The priests chanted and afterward admitted, among themselves, that they had been helpful and not essential, which is a victory for any church. The smiths produced a blade that would not dull unless asked to, and the man who had asked it to was a butcher who wanted it to slack a little so he did not slice his own finger. Men came from as far as Yunkai to buy plowshares that did not mine stones. A troupe of mummers invented a drama in which a man refused a chair and became a door instead, and the last scene in which children ran in and out of the door laughing made the pear seller cry into her apron and then scold herself for the indulgence. In the 7th year, the ground complained. It did not roar, because it had learned manners, but it shook like a horse in flies. The glass candle quivered and threw strange slants of light into the council room. On the ridge, The old palace's facades shifted a hand's breadth and then had the decency to stop. The spring ran hotter and then, briefly, cold as if surprised. Men gathered in the basin and waited for a verdict no man could give. The Kohoric woman went down into the cellar where the green glass had first been found, barefoot, and pressed both hands to the floor as if reminding the ground of its name. "We have built weight upon your memory," she said to it, as if to a friend too proud for pity. "We will redistribute. We will ask the baths to wait, and the smiths to work at night, and the bakers to move their ovens because we have leaned too much on a single hot corner. We will be light in the afternoons. We will let the wind back through the upper streets. We are listening. We hear you." It was not magic. Magic would have been quicker and messier. It was administration, which is the sister that keeps magic from filling its pockets with silverware. They widened 3 streets and broke 2 in the hope that the city would remember how to breathe. They forbade carts in the central square after noon and ordered the brazier at the priest's shrine to be banked to half its vanity. They cut vents in 3 roofs and altered the angle of a public stair by 4 degrees. Men complained because complaining is the other sister. The ground sighed and settled, and the pond above the pearseller's house did not become a geyser, which was counted a triumph in the only ledger that matters. Shai grew into a man you might have trusted with your best lie. He married the girl who had picked splinters from Hayes's wing and who did not wear cleverness on her face because she kept it in her hands. They had a daughter who learned to whistle with a reed before she learned to read, and who stood at the foot of the counting house stair and announced to anyone who would listen that she would not climb to the roof until Hayes invited her. When she was 9, Hayes inclined her head like a doorman and let the girl press her ear to the dragon's chest and then fell asleep with the child there, which made a sound in the city like a rumor you wanted to believe. Valantis tried one last time by buying men inside the city. They picked a smith's apprentice who had not been praised enough, and a priest who had not been listened to enough, and a harbor man who had been paid exactly the proper amount for too long and had therefore learned to resent accuracy. They whispered to them in the kind of darkness that men invent, with gifts that tinkle and glitter and feel better than they cost. The 3 men met one night in the shadow beneath the basalt quay to decide how to open a gate, because treachery prefers to think in architecture. Shai found them because he had begun to learn the smell of intention the way a baker knows when dough has risen enough to be worth punching. He did not come with soldiers. He came with a ledger under his arm and a lantern in his hand and a story on his lips about how the first granary had been built badly and had to be torn down and rebuilt in a way that offended the very idea of grain. He told them this quietly until their hatred for him became embarrassment for themselves. Then he set the lantern on the stones and said, "If I report you, the city will punish you. If you confess, the city will forgive you because it likes to be flattered by repentance. If you leave, the city will forget you, which is the only thing worse. Decide before this flame reaches this scratch on the lantern, because the harbor wind is not patient." The apprentice confessed loudly because he wanted to be seen. The harbor man fled the next day with a pocket too heavy to run properly and was caught by a net that had been set for mullet. The priest sat and wept with 2 fingers pressed to his eyes and said the god who had hired him was smaller than the one who was not listening now. Valantis sent no emissary of condolence, which was a relief to those who like problems revealed rather than wrapped in ribbon. In the 10th year, the Book of Heat was given a twin, the Book of Water. The girl who had picked splinters from Hayes's wing wrote it with wet fingers and a habit of kneeling at the edges of things. She would stand at the aqueduct's highest mouth and tilt her head and hear where the water lost interest, and then she would teach it to remain interesting with a stone moved here and a channel widened there. The baths filled properly for the first time in 4 years, and old men became generous for an afternoon because warmth does that to joints and opinions. In the market, a man from Tyrosh told a story about a place where the ground hummed and the law held, and sold 3 carpets for a price that paid 2 apprentices for a year. The priests learned to speak less in summer and to invent a winter festival. They called it the Night of the Old Fire and stood silent around the brazier as if guarding it from all the war. DS they had used incorrectly. Hayes mated, finally, after seasons of contempt for every male that dared throw shadow near her. She chose like a storm chooses a hill to spend itself on, suddenly and completely. The male had a bite taken from his tail and one eye too eager, and he won not by strength but by refusing to quit the sky first. They went high and vanished where the air becomes a colder sort of truth. When they returned, 3 days later, scales scraped and mouth stubborn. The city applauded in spite of itself, which embarrassed everyone involved. The eggs came in a year of rain. They were flatter at one end than Hayes's had been and flecked with a color the Book of Heat did not yet have a name for. Children were told to be careful and were, for a day. Then they touched anyway because life without disobedience is a theology, not a city. No one was blasted. One child was singed and wore his bandage like a crown for a week and was insufferable and forgivable. On a night when the moon was a large coin and even the cats had gone bored, Shai sat before the glass candle and put his hands on his knees and thought of nothing on purpose. The candle's light deepened, and the room grew wider without growing larger. He saw men on the Rhône, their oars biting water with discipline. He saw a woman behind a desk in Bravos practicing the face she would use to pretend to be surprised the next day. He saw a boy in a tower in Old Town sketching a diagram of a dragon's wing without ever having seen one and almost getting it right. He saw, very faint and then brighter, a shore of gray stones that had been in his vision for years and a woman sitting upon them with her shawl tight and the wind behaving. She raised her head and looked east and said softly, as if to the sea, "If you won't send him back, then keep what he made." He felt the words hit the water and come to him as if the sea had learned to carry messages tenderly. He opened his eyes, stood, and went to the roof. Hayes lay there with her head on her forearms, the eternal posture of a thing that has learned patience from rocks. Shai touched her jaw the way the woman had done years ago. "He is not coming back," he told her, as if some part of her had been waiting for a second answer to the first. "We keep what he made. That's the work." Hayes blinked slowly and turned her head toward the northwest and then back to him, and if a dragon could shrug she might have. She folded her wings with the finality of a woman closing the shutters at twilight and lowered her head again. In the 13th year, they built a school that was not a temple, which is an accomplishment most cities mishandle. It had a hall with a roof that threw rain properly and windows that invited wind and benches that did not make the legs of poor children ache. It taught numbers first and then letters and then the habit of not believing the first story a man tells if the story makes the man look clean. The Book of Heat was copied in pieces for apprentices who had earned the right to know why their hands had burned the way they had burned last winter. The Book of Water was read by girls who became women who taught boys to stop building ditches that talked themselves into rivers. The Red Priest sent a man to teach history. He taught a thing he called the Age of Ash and caught himself once calling it the Age of Mercy and was embarrassed and never corrected for it. Davos died in the 15th year, in a chair by a window where the harbor had meant to meet his eyes one more time and had. He placed his own hands on his chest because he liked the look of a man who had finished an argument. The city grieved him without panic. It spoke of smuggled onions and correct curses and a patience with the wind and of a time he had told a boy to count to 20 again because he had missed 19 and that sort of neglect could bring ships to grief. They put him in the ground in a place that did not flood and planted a fig above him. The fig grew with the obstinacy of a man correcting a superior and bore fruit that tasted like a weathered oath. The pear seller, who had grown so thin she looked like a proud stick, laughed until she wheezed and then told Shai to fetch her water and quit hovering. In the 17th year, Volantis sent no ships and no emissaries and no knives. It sent, instead, a poet who was also a spy and had never been good at either until he stopped pretending they were different trades. He came with a lute. He stayed in a cheap room above a tavern and wrote a song about the sound the ground made when you apologized to it with the right amount of sincerity. He wrote another about a man who had said no to a chair and yes to ash, and he sang it at sundown on the quay while men mended nets and women pretended to be unimpressed and children learned to clap in rhythm by studying each other's hands. The song went to Volantis and came back as a story in which the man had been taller and his hair whiter and his dragons more obedient. The city shrugged and kept its own version, which had more dirt in it and better timing. Hayes's brood hatched in the 19th year, on a night of fog when the glass candle burned like a low star. The first to break shell was the smallest, a creature with a scale pattern like an argument about how bright a thing should be. She sneezed ash into the face of the girl who had once slept against Hayes's chest and now wore authority like a belt rather than a crown. The girl laughed and cried and then laughed again and said, "You're already a thief. She named the little one Ember in her mouth and kept the name inside for a day to see if it sounded like permission or possession. The city smelled of shell then, which is a fine smell for a place to have in the first week of a new decade. By then, the map in the counting house had been redrawn twice with a smudge of charcoal by a woman who knew that borders looked better when they recognized why men had put them there in the first place. Trade routes bowed toward the smoking sea and called it a detour as a joke, and then stopped calling it a detour because jokes get tired. Cohor sent fewer men and more questions. Bravos lent once at a moderate rate and did not blink when paid early, because prudence had at last become a fashion among their kind. Old Town sent a book about dragons that was wrong in useful ways, and the scribe who had copied it blushed when told so and asked to see a wing, and then saw one and fainted as if performing a rite that might impress a girl he had left behind. There were bad years too. One storm came wrong and killed 3 children in a tent city on the hot flats above the quarry because their fathers had believed the wind would not dare. Men went to the fathers and told them the wind had no honor. They moved the tent cities in future. A fever came and tried to pretend it was new. The bath women recognized it as old and told it to leave by boiling everything it preferred to drink. A boy set fire to a warehouse because a girl had not spoken to him and because he wanted to see whether destruction was as easy as it feels when you say it in your head. He was caught and brought before the council, and the pear seller, now more voice than bone, told him to stand very still while she forgave him and then pressed him into building the new warehouse out of stone for 3 years, which cured him of wanting to be noticed for the wrong reasons. In the 21st year, Shai's daughter climbed the counting house stair at noon as if invited by noon itself, walked onto the roof, and stood with her hands behind her back like a person who had decided of what her life would consist. Hayes lay as she always lay, nose toward the sea, the line of her back like a hill's spine. The girl said nothing. She put her palm upon the dragon's lip, which was hot and a little wet like a slow bell. Hayes opened her eye, and in it the girl saw first herself and then, behind herself, the older self who would use words more sparingly and not when she was angry. Hayes lowered her head, and the girl leaned her forehead to her jaw, and the city below felt a weather change that did not trouble roofs. In the 23rd year, a ship from King's Landing arrived without an emblem the city recognized. Its timbers had been new once and now had learned resignation. On deck stood a man whose cloak had been red before the sun had its say. He wore no sword. He had the air of a herald who does not like the taste of his message. He was admitted to the counting house and offered water with lemon because this was a civilization. He drank, nodded, and said, "My queen wishes to be certain your dragons will not fly over her harvest." Shai leaned back a little. "Our dragons do not prefer grain. They prefer fish, truth, and punctuality. If her harvest invites none of those, her harvest is safe." "Humor is difficult from this distance," the herald said without malice. "Her concern is a practical one. The shadow frightens men who thresh." "Then tell her we will set a line," Shai said. "Not for fear but for courtesy. A world with lines that are courtesy stands longer than a world with lines that are threats. And if she asks what she must do in return, keep her wolves fed," Shai said, "and do not ask the sea to give back what it has taken." The herald left, uncertain whether he had completed a transaction or a poem. The ship set off with the tide, and Hayes flew an arc that did not cross the line Shai had described without standing to measure, because he had not described it with chalk but with a way of thinking, which is the only kind of boundary a dragon can remember. The city reached its 30th year without announcing it. Cakes were made without naming the occasion. Children were scolded without historians being called to mark the anecdote. The basalt quay had a dent in it where a storm had thrown a temper and had been permitted the dent as a concession to drama. The baths smelled of stone and citrus and the lather of a centipede of gossip moving slowly. The Book of Heat had a 3rd volume no one read because the first 2 were enough for life. The Book of Water had holes burned through it in the parts that insisted upon equations. The girl who had written it said that was appropriate because water disobeys and then obeys by surprise. Hayes was old as dragons count such matters. Her flights were lower, broader, more interested in the city's skin than in the clouds' gossip. She preferred to sleep with her head near the counting house door as if still waiting for a footfall she had decided, long ago, would not come again. When she died, it was on the roof at afternoon, with her eye open and lazy and then closed as if bored with the day's news. The city climbed the stair in built-in shifts and stood with their hands upon the stones, speaking to one another in low voices as if a grandparent had fallen asleep in a chair that had to be kept because no other chair would do. Shai's daughter, now a woman whose hands remembered decisions before the room did, pressed her forehead to Hayes's jaw as the woman in gray had once done, and said the single word that was not a prayer and not a command and not a bargain. Thanks. They did not burn her. They did not bury her. They built around her a hall without walls and a roof that trusted the wind. Children came with reed whistles until someone with taste in their ears taught them which notes cozied the air rather than cluttered it. Men came to put their palms against her scale and then took those palms away and remembered to wash them before eating. The priests learned the new prayers quickly and taught them more slowly, because they had learned something like humility years before and preferred to pretend they had not. The brood she had left was almost full-grown now, and the one called Ember flew low over the baths at dusk and stole the steam to braid into her own posture. She landed on the counting house roof as if asked and allowed a small boy to hold up a fish head, and then withdrew it on the tip of her tongue with a delicacy that made the boy's mother laugh and clap her hand to her mouth to hide it from the gods. The city learned to live without the old sound and with the new one, which is the definition of time done properly. Sometimes, when the glass candle burned at midnight and the counting house windows were open to let in the polite wind, Shai would sit with his hands on his knees and think of nothing and let the candle decide. It would show him small things, an argument in Tyrosh about whether green looks like money or like illness, a boy in Karth betting on whether a beetle would cross a line, a woman on the gray shore picking up a stone and throwing it and choosing a smaller stone next and throwing it as if that were a better kind of courage. It showed him once a room with a chair of knives and a new man upon it, younger than his crown and older than his eyes, and it showed Shai a bell rope moving in wind and no hand, and he closed his eyes and let the vision go like a fish he could have eaten and did not. He lived to see 4 eggs crack without ceremony and to scold, gently, a boy who wanted to climb onto a dragon's back as if kinship were a ladder. He lived to hear a poet in the market sing a new song about the time a man had said yes to Ash, and to see children in the front row roll their eyes because they had heard it better from their grandmothers. He lived to walk with his daughter's daughter to the basin at sundown and stand in the warmth and say nothing and mean gratitude. He lived, which remains the best compliment a city can pay its founders. And when he died, long after the figs had learned to widen their roots so the ground's humming would not tip them over, long after the basalt quay had been dented again and accepted it as character, the city did not panic. It stood with its breath in its lungs and then let that breath out as if politely. The council met. Men and women who had been apprentices became masters. A boy in the market cheated his weights and was caught and thrashed and forgiven, in that order. Ember flew, cast a shadow over threshers, and then lifted a little higher out of courtesy, which is a better reason than fear. On the roof, under the hall without walls, the old bones kept hiding their secrets in plain sight. Beyond the channels, in the smoking sea, a current shifted as currents do, for reasons that have to do with the moon and the moon's mood. A small boat drifted into a slick and came out smelling of iron and old stories. The fisherman in it looked at his hands and decided they were still his. He looked toward the city and decided to sell his fish there because fish sold better where men told the truth simply and lied with effort. He came upon the basalt quay at noon, and a girl took his rope and made it fast, and a boy offered him water, and a dragon's shadow passed over them briefly and then returned to mind its own business. The ground hummed. The wind could be reasoned with. The law walked in the mornings. The city had learned to keep what he had made, which is a craft and not a spell. The craft passed on like a recipe written on a wall in a kitchen no one would dare repaint. Men came, ate, left, returned. Children grew into the sort of adults who apologize correctly. Priests remembered to be useful. Smiths taught their apprentices where to put their fingers. Poets learned when to shut up and when to perform and sometimes did the right one. The sea put out its hand and the city put something into it to thank it for the favor of a channel. No one wrote a proper history because they were busy. The story happened in mouths and on ledgers and in the angle of a stair and the width of a ditch and the courtesy of a dragon in a sky that had learned lines that were not threats. The Iron Throne's weight stayed where it was, and men arranged their necks to bear it, and sometimes their backs remembered they were not built for it. In Valyria, iron remembered fire instead, and men remembered the use of a hearth, and the old bones on the roof remembered a hand against a jaw and a boy's laugh when a fruit stained his wrist, and the glass candle burned or did not as it pleased. The city breathed. The sea did not change its mind, and east of where maps had once darkened their corners with dragons as a warning, there was a place where the dragons cast their shadows in welcome, and men unlearned fear and learned the more tedious and nicer thing: maintenance. In the evenings, when the air turned the color of pears left too long in a bowl, and the day's gossip had spent itself and begun to nap, and children had been convinced to come home by the smell of beans, Ember liked to fly a small, mean loop over the market and look at the faces without malice. Sometimes she went higher, just enough to see the line of the shore to the west and the line of the low inland hills to the east, and to feel that she was in the center of an honest argument. Sometimes she went lower and let her wingtip brush the surface of the water so that the sea would remember her handwriting. She learned to hover in a way that did not frighten threshers. She learned to land in a way that did not crack tiles. She learned to look at men and see, without contempt, their need for lines and measures and phrases that end with periods. On one such evening, when the basalt was giving back the day's heat in a polite whisper, a boy with hair stuck to his forehead ran up the counting house stair and burst onto the roof and stopped immediately because this was, despite everything, a temple. He held not a scroll but a fish wrapped in fig leaves, hot from a fire, and he set it down before the old bones with reverence, not for the bones but for the habit of thanks the bones had taught. Ember watched, head tilted, as if considering the proper amount of heat to give to this gesture. The boy turned and bowed to the woman who had once pressed her ear to Hayes's chest and now wore lines around her eyes that did not like to be called lines. "My mother says to tell the council that the ditch above the pear woman's house is talking itself into a river again," he said, breathless. "And the baker says to ask for more wood that has already forgiven being burned. And the priest says he has forgotten which prayer to use for a man who stole bread for his sister who did not want it. And the harbor says the wind has become bored." The woman nodded and smiled and stood. "Then tell your mother we remember how to teach water manners," she said. "Tell the baker we will send him old wood that will not resent bread. Tell the priest to use the prayer that has fewer adjectives. Tell the harbor to tell the wind a new joke." "And if the wind does not laugh?" the boy asked, serious as only a boy asked to carry messages can be. "Then tell it the old joke slower," she said. "It will be polite eventually. Even the wind learned that here." He ran off, the fish steaming slightly under its fig leaf coat. Ember lowered her head, exhaled once, and warmed the air just enough that the smell of roasted flesh lifted and made 3 cats sit up and consider the merits of civilization. Night fell as it always fell, in stages as if learning choreography. Lamps were lit, then lowered, then forgotten. The priests banked their brazier and did not pretend it had done more work than it had. The baths emptied, the basalt held its tongue. The sea, which knows everything men pretend to forget, kissed the quay and then backed away as if not to presume. The glass candle burned in a corner and threw a light that did not insist upon itself. Somewhere, in a room a man had once chosen because of a window and then learned to love because of the chair beside it, a ledger lay open, and upon it a single line had been written in a hand that did not need witnesses: "Keep what he made." The city did, and in the morning, when the sun took up its work like a craftsman with an honest wage, and the first boat nudged toward the channel and the first argument remembered to use nouns, and the dragons stretched and learned their new scars again, Valyria, which had refused to disappear even when men had been certain it had, continued to show what is harder than conquest and kinder than abdication: the long, stubborn art of a place becoming itself and inviting men to do the same.